unilateralism as a term actually comes after multilateralism in the mid 20th century, if you look at the etymology and how the word's been used. And I think that's important because unilateralism has often been in political science and historians of foreign relations kind of rejected, right? It's a bit of an epithet. It's not as bad as being an isolationist in the popular imagination, except for those who want that mantle, that very limited group, because multilateralism seems so obvious, right? In the post-World War II era, nations should work together. It's really a question of how they should work together. What's the leadership organization of how nations move in lockstep or not, or collaborate on different kinds of challenges from climate change and fossil fuels to collective security and vaccinations and dealing with infectious diseases. There's a whole host of these kinds of areas. So what I argue in the chapter, and what I think is actually quite insightful for thinking through the long history of the US, is that from the very start, from the so-called model treaty, that was one of the three things that the US government began to do in the revolutionary moment of 1776. They made the Articles of Confederation, they did the Declaration, and they made a model treaty. Why those three things? Why did these committees do them? The model treaty was about how the US should interact with the world and on its own terms. It asserted the US wouldn't pay duties or import tariffs to anyone. Really bold for a weak power, right? And throughout, the first half of the US's history, it was a weak nation. So this unilateral impulse was partly about protecting the US. You can find this in all the sort of great thinkers of US foreign relations and policies, but you can also find this in the letters of regular people. They don't want their vessels stopped. They don't want to be stopped when they're traveling or trading, doing business. At borders, in the water, et cetera. They want to assert a kind of neutral rights in the world, mind their own business. And so, what I say in the piece, and you can see this in lots of different, actually political parties over time, it comes from across the political spectrum, arguments for unilateralism. It doesn't need to operate as an ideology to function ideologically, is something that I say, which really fundamentally means that it as an organizing set of principles, as a framework for action, unilateralism can actually be more visceral. So we could think to the very immediate past, and where I start the chapter, and a couple talks I've given on this, is the Trump administration, right? People were surprised that he's pulling out of so many things. Well, not historians like me, because we've studied these ideas and they go very far back. They may be the primordial soup of how Americans have thought about their role in the world, transactionally, what benefits Americans most. So if you're thinking about those, what I said earlier, and definitionally, what are the core values and assumptions that organize the infinite complexity of the world into discernible, discrete paths forward? How does it benefit me? Why would I be involved with other countries? Why spend blood and treasure elsewhere when it can go at home? What's the, and then other elements of that as a weaker nation, or how should the US operate? Another piece of that puzzle would be on unilateralism. Operating alone in the world gives the US a lot more autonomy, right? So sovereignty and autonomy go there. And you find this in lots of folks who are hawkish, right? You don't have to be pacifist. In fact, you could be more open to territorial land grabs and aggrandizement if you're following a unilateralist orientation in foreign policy. It isn't just insular, it could actually be quite expansive. So, this set of ideas embedded in unilateralism, self-sufficiency, non-entanglement, operating alone in the world, incubating new industries, for instance, protectionism can go in there. We've seen that recently. We've seen that in lots of different moments in US history. So, I think that that's useful for us in understanding why there's such a strong group in the American population today, and has been in lots of other moments, who want to pursue a kind of go it alone path in the world. As early Cold War conservatives called that, they called it some combination of the free hand. And they didn't mean that economically. They meant the US should have a free hand to follow its best interest wherever they go, especially, interestingly, after the Second World War, when the US has an enormous amount of power. They say, don't do the Marshall Plan. Don't put bases around the US. Instead, focus on exactly what is in the US's best interest. And we've seen that again in the 2010s and 2020s. And it wouldn't surprise me if we continue to see that recur, because these ideologies and core sets of ideas and convictions are so powerful.